Before Reid.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. And I listened intently to the member for Grey's contribution, and I thank him for it. It is extraordinary, however, that faced with the housing affordability crisis, his answer is, what about mission creep? Mission creep is something that we need to consider. We on this side of the House recognise that housing affordability crisis that we are in at the moment requires all levels of government to be working together, because while the problem is complex, it ought not to be intractable. And that's the key here, not to be concerned about mission creep, but to be working with all levels of government to make sure that people can afford their own home. And it's extraordinary to hear from those opposite their concern about Commonwealth funding in this space when they were willing to fund people's renovations to their homes, and now they're unwilling to help fund people getting into their first home. My parents worked hard, saved up and were able to buy a house 4 years after arriving in this country. They still live there today. It's a modest 3-bedroom townhouse. They never had enough money to renovate it, so the tiles in the bathroom are very, very retro. While my childhood home won't win any design awards, it was important to us. It was the foundation on which the success of my family was built upon. It gave us security and stability and a sense of community. And that is the importance of a place to call home. It's not unique to my family. Housing is the bedrock of the lives of so many people in Australia. And I'd like to quote from the Productivity Commission report into housing released in August last year. Housing is a basic human need and is central to our physical and mental health and quality of life. But we know home ownership is getting harder and harder for so many people. The great Australian dream is becoming just a pipe dream. The challenges of paying a mortgage are felt most acutely in electorates like mine in Sydney. 24.8% of households in Reid are in mortgage stress. That is, their mortgage repayments are above 30% of their household income, and that is significantly more than the rest of Australia, which sits at 14.5%. And these figures are from 2021, before the current interest rate rises. While the story around house prices is what fills newspaper columns, it's rents that really reflect the cost of housing. I quote again from the Productivity Commission report. About a quarter of Australians rent in the private market. More Australians are renting for more of their lives than in the past. Year on year, rents in my electorate are rising. In Lidcombe, they're up 12.2%. In Homebush, they're up 13%. And in Breakfast Point, up 16%. Housing is chewing up more and more of household income. And when it comes to social and affordable housing, in New South Wales, the need is acute. There are more than 51,000 applicants on the wait list, with 6.5 applicants given priority status. That's 6,500 applicants given priority status. That's 6,500 priority applicants left waiting. They are the most vulnerable: women and children fleeing domestic violence, people with disabilities. For those not deemed a priority, their expected waiting time is more than 10 years. Imagine waiting 10 years for a place to call home. The housing affordability crisis has been around for a long time, and I'm going to quote from Jason Falinski, the former member for Mackellar here. Home ownership, one of the building blocks of Australian society, has been falling for the last 30 years. In my view, this represents an urgent moral call for action by governments of all levels to restore the Australian dream for this generation and the ones that follow. He didn't see this as mission creep. He saw this as something that was core to what the Commonwealth and state governments ought to be doing. And he said this in 2021. Here are some points I think we can all agree on in this place. Secure and quality housing is important for everyone's well-being. We are in a housing affordability crisis. And finally, this crisis has been brewing for many years. So, if we can agree on these points, the question is, what did those opposite do when they were in power for 9 years? The short answer, nothing. In fact, they actively worked to make the situation worse. The Abbott government abolished the National Housing Supply Council. The council, established in 2008 under the Rudd Labor government, was there to monitor housing demand, supply and affordability in Australia. It gave us a better understanding of the problem. That council and those insights now gone. They also failed to convene a meeting of the state and territory ministers in 5 years. We know how important it is that states, territories and the Commonwealth work together to address housing and affordability, but those opposite could not get on board. In Australia, we have major iconic infrastructure: the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Opera House, the Snowy Hydro Scheme. We are a country obsessed with major infrastructure projects. Well, I want this to be the next major infrastructure project: social and affordable housing. The Albanese Labor government has been unashamedly ambitious with our housing policy. Our housing policy sees social and affordable housing as a key plank to solving the housing affordability crisis. That's the difference when you have a government that recognises housing equity as being important. It's good for those who need to access social housing, women and children fleeing domestic violence, for older women who are increasingly facing homelessness, for our veterans, for First Nations families, for those with disabilities. We have established the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. The returns on the fund will build 30,000 new social and affordable homes in the fund's first 5 years, including 4,000 homes for women and children impacted by domestic violence or older women at risk of homelessness. In a historic deal, we are working with states, territories and the private sector to build more homes. We've set an ambitious target of 1 million homes by the end of the decade. This is big, nation-building stuff that will transform the lives of so many. In September last year, the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Julie Collins, came to Burwood in my electorate to meet with community housing providers, local council and organisations assisting the homeless. I want to thank the organisations for participating in that roundtable: Burwood Community Welfare Services, St Paul's Parish, St Vincent's de Paul's, Bridge Housing, Women and Girls Emergency Centre, Urella, Burwood Council. Many of the participants said it was the first time they had an opportunity to speak about the challenges with housing affordability and homelessness with a federal minister. I'm grateful to the minister for taking the time to meet with the community. This is a government that cares. It is one that is listening and acting to address the housing affordability crisis.